I'm trying to get this done early because I have something to do on Friday. A friend of mine is coming over, so here we go. We're going to talk about controls a little bit more, and I'm actually going to include one more timeline because I forgot to do it, or more precisely, I realized I had all the controllers I needed to take a picture of. So, yay, you get some of my pictures again. Let's move on. So the Wii Expectations controls are not the controls that we got for the Wii. There is a slight difference. That thumbstick you see on the nunchuck, that controlled the character, you kind of zoomed in, or you controlled the... Can you hear my dog walking around? Just wondering. You can hear the... or you can zoom in or orient the camera based on how you press the Z button found on that nunchuck controller, and then you used the Wiimote as kind of the sword or the weapon of any kind, and it was pretty good. And they actually added an add-on for the Wiimote so that you could get more accuracy and stuff, but they never added anything for the nunchuck, and it was only a motion controller. It only sensed motion, which to me is a real disappointment. Because the controls I really, really wanted was you controlled the camera using the nunchuck, and if you felt like moving to the left or right with the camera, you just kind of tilted it to the left or tilted it to the right, and that kind of moved you around. But we never got that. And, you know, if you wanted to go up or down, you kind of moved it down or moved it up. Just kept a basic axis or something like that. It couldn't do that, or nobody did that. I don't know. If I always suspect that it's actually possible, it's just nobody was willing to do it. When I first got into studying the controls of these consoles and stuff, I discovered that most people don't think about the controls very often, and for every person who was like, yeah, I'm here for, you know, the major graphical stuff, you would have... Oh man, there's a bunch of stuff happening around me, and I'm just trying to make this video, so sorry for any backward or no sounds in the background. But you would... I always suspect that there was a way to do it, but the programmers were more looking for graphical programming abilities because that's what they were trained to do, and not for controls. And because of that, we got a lot of problems where people were like, oh, well, you know, it isn't graphically capable, but I'm not willing to learn the controls, which is the entire point of the console, because I don't know how to program that. You catch people kind of off guard with those comments. But it was what I wanted for the Wii, and I do admit to some disappointment with the Wii because of that. There were a lot of fun games. This is Skyward Sword. It was a gorgeous game. I gotta admit, it got kind of boring. It didn't quite use the controls right, and that was the thing about the Wii. If the controls worked, it didn't matter if it was silly and little, it worked. It was a good game. And if the controls didn't work, the game was awful, and we called it waggle or something like that, but really it was a game that wasn't built correctly, and you could feel it. But yet, we can see how this game has totally influenced others, and all that. I mean, that thumbstick right there, the nunchuck, you can find it in arcade games today. So there is a lot of... And I just realized you could, in fact, do Magician's Dead using the Nintendo Switch because of the IR controller that they've got. I mean, that's a bit weird to think about, but yeah, you could do an arcade game with that controller. Interesting, but we're going to move on. VR has kind of has an issue. You now control the camera by just moving your head, but they don't know how to move the character. And yes, you see some thumbsticks there, and yes, you can use them, but most of the games don't play well that way. So you're kind of left to this small area for the game. The games I have played, I'm either just moving around, like literally I could just be sitting on a chair and move around, or that was my laundry if you could hear that, or you would kind of jump to the places, you know, just kind of jump. I'm here. I'm now over there. All of what was the name of that X-Man? He was the German monk guy. I can't remember. Oh, he is not Beast. Now I feel weird. Anyway, not as important. But within VR, those are basically the controls. You're either moving, you're either just basically a standstill character. You're just sitting on a chair and moving your head, or you are stuck within a small box. And you can move around this 10-foot box, but you can't go outside of it. And they try to add in the controls and stuff, but they don't work. They don't feel natural. And so it kind of leaves the game not quite feeling right. I've played some great games. The other day I played a shooter for the Oculus Rift, and that's what's pictured. By the way, it was at Best Buy that I got that demonstration, and it was a great game. I really enjoyed it until I tried to shoot a different monster or do a specific thing, and I couldn't. And it was actually very annoying. As soon as the controls break down, you're just feeling this this disconnect from the game, and VR is all about being super connected to the game, and you feel that. I can't tell you that some of the simpler games are actually a lot more fun. Like the other day, a friend of mine was showing off his little VR headset that he connects to his phone, and one of his add-ons was just walking around a Google Maps, the VR Google Maps thing, and I walked around my hometown in Hawaii, and I was just like, oh my gosh, oh, Laie Point, oh, the rock's still up. That means they took the picture when I was still there. Oh my gosh. And if you know the rock, you know what I'm talking about. But there was a rock on an island a little far off, and if it actually got pushed away by waves, or pushed off by waves. So it was only there for about 5 years anyway. So so I know for a fact that I was there because that rock. And I wasn't able to see my house because the controls were a bit weird. But that was the point where I was just like, yeah, this is cool. I can look around. I can see stuff. I can point stuff out. And everybody around me was like, we don't know what you're looking at. And that's another thing to talk about. VR is amazing, but they haven't quite gotten the controls right. But if you look, you can see that thumbstick, that nunchuck right there, that Wiimote right there, on how it's used and the way they kind of positioned it. And actually, let's look at it even better. We have the N64 controller. Speaking of which, this is not a professional shot. That's actually my N64 controller. The next shot as well I took. These are just my controllers, and that happens to be my bed. My bed sheets just look really nice and posed and stuff for... I'm still kind of laughing at this. It looks great for what it is, but it's really just my room quickly taking a picture with my phone. So I'm kind of amazed. Anyway, the N64 controller. If you look, don't you see that nunchuck controller right there? Right down that middle? And there's kind of a joke that the N64 controller is just a regular controller with the thumbstick down in the middle. And I've got to admit, that's very accurate. The N64 was an attempt to do a really cool controls thing. And if the games were right for it, they were amazing. GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Mario Kart. We could have a really long list here. Zelda, Mario, not Castlevania, sadly. They tried, they couldn't quite get everything right, which drives me nuts because I really enjoy the game. But if you look, you can actually put your right hand onto the thumbstick control area, and then your left hand onto the D-pad, and you have a completely different control scheme than you had beforehand. I don't know of any game that did that. Then you have, the usual, where you put your left hand on the thumbstick and your right hand on the right side, and you can use that as a way. And you'll notice that they don't have the dual controls, the dual stick controls that you would find in in modern consoles, those yellow buttons are supposed to control the camera, though they ended up being used for other things for The Legend of Zelda. Those were item selections or how to play music. Nintendo would take their controllers and be like, okay, what can we do with this? What cool things can we do? And they would always make these cool things to do and these really innovative ideas. And they weren't just innovative, they were done well. So they weren't, somebody else could have done it earlier, but they did it right. And that there's a major difference there. And so it's kind of this weird thing. You can see that nunchuck right there. You can see how it would have been influential to the nunchuck and then to the VR. And I didn't even realize I made that timeline. I otherwise I would have organized this differently. But you can just see that slow movement and how it influenced others. To this day, I still love the N64 controller, but I can't play, most games using an ordinary controller because they didn't implement the same way. Know what I mean? I mean, there's 6 buttons there, and then there's an R controller button, and then there's a Z button. And yes, you kind of have that, but not to this level or to this way. So it gets interesting how they've had to take controls from a very weird looking controller. And if I were to tell you the truth, it looks like the Tiger Flame from Sagat from Street Fighter 2. And go ahead, turn it to its side, and bam, there you are. The Yoga Flame, or not Yoga Flame, Tiger Fire, or Tiger Punch, or something. And, just the... There it is, right there. See? Should have chosen an orange controller, I guess. But having to take this controller and then make a game based on it when all the other controls aren't like it is difficult. Even though these are the top games of that era, we can't quite implement them correctly. So the best way to play an N64 game is with an N64 and with an N64 controller. There is no other console with this kind of controller to be played. Kind of an interesting thing. Not only do we see this timeline, but we also see that it is from a very specific era, and you can't get games quite like it just because the controllers are different. Finally, I thought I'd do a quick timeline on SEGA controllers. I wasn't able to get the Master System. That's what it was called in Japan, so I'm going to call it that. And it basically looked like a Nintendo controller. And that's what it looked like. And, A, B, D-pad. It was pretty simple. But when they introduced the Sega Genesis, Sega is a major, sorry, I'm being distracted. There is so much sound going around in my house right now. I'm like, I hope you don't hear this. It snowed a bunch last night, so there's just weird sounds trying to keep the house heated, and then laundry, so sorry about all this. But the Sega is a major arcade company, and they totally went with JAMA regulations. So between the Sega Master System and between the controller you see on the left, you have a 3-button one with a D-pad, and that was called the regular Sega Genesis controller. And literally, Sonic the Hedgehog 1 through 3 were based on it, and all these extra games were based on that controller, 3 buttons, D-pad, because that's how it was set up for the arcade. If you played Strider, you had 3 buttons. You had I was about to say nunchuck. Oh man, twisty knob. No. You had. I'm moving it around in my hand. Joystick. You have a joystick and you have 3 buttons, and that's how you played. So literally, when they copied off Strider, they couldn't quite do the sounds, but they could get a lot of the graphics and everything done because everything was standard to the JAMA setup, and because that was fairly standard to the Sega Genesis, you could just copy it over pretty easily. Well, then the Super Nintendo comes out and it has all these extra controls and buttons and stuff, and you don't see that in this picture, but Street Fighter 2 comes out and they've got 6 buttons on the right. And almost immediately Sega comes out with a 6-button controller. And there it is on the left. And that's actually a Sega Saturn controller. So when the Sega Saturn came out, that was the standard controller for all racing and all things, because that was the standard plus controller for arcade. Yes, that's not a joystick, but the thumb pad really works the best for an arcade, for a console. So they implemented it that way. But then 3D came in, and they're like, oh man, we got to make a 3D controller. And so they made the 3D controller, as you see right there, and yes, that looks like a circle with little handles on it. But you can see, you know, the 6 buttons and the D-pad. It's got a great D-pad, by the way. That's a brand new controller. I just pulled it out of the plastic, took the picture, and put it back in the plastic bag. But the interesting thing here is, if you want it to be with a thumbstick, you actually have to switch it over to the thumbstick and then switch it back to the D-pad. You can't have both at the same time. They did that for some reason. I don't know. Maybe they thought they were saving money. I don't really understand. But that was the 3D controller. And if you want to play some 3D games, this is the controller you have to use. You know, you want to play Panzer Dragoon, you've got to use this controller. The controller on the left will not work. And they did the best they could with what they had. The Sega Saturn didn't do as well. They kind of dropped it really fast. But there were some excellent, excellent games released for it. And the controls were really well built for arcade. So you could have a lot of really good 2D games and actually some pretty good 3D games. They are pretty good. And, you know, if you got a Saturn, might as well play them. Now I want to play some of my racing games and see if the controls are better with that thumbstick. Huh. Anyway, moving on, the Dreamcast pretty much looks like the Sega Saturn 3D controller, only a little bit better implemented. Everything is kind of placed a bit better. And you'll notice there's less buttons. It follows the Super Nintendo controls a lot better now. And they thought they'd be kind of innovative, so they added save packs. In the same way the N64 controller had save packs on it. And they added a little screen on the controller. So, in a way, this is a grandfather to the Wii U, in a way. Not really. But you can see, you know, the same concepts. You know, okay, you've got a thumbstick now because that's the major controls for 3D games. But we don't have any idea how the camera is supposed to work. And so, you know, you have that. And then you have the L and R buttons, which are sensitive to how hard you crank on them. And that's really cool because when you're playing a game like Crazy Taxi, you can hit the gas a little so that you can turn, or hit the brakes a little, and it really adds to the feel. And they created a bunch of extra controls. If they felt like this game needed extra controls, they just released a new controller for it. My favorite one was Samba de Amigo. But yeah, there we have Sega controls as kind of a timeline. You know, they followed the arcade to the best of their abilities. The Dreamcast was literally based on the Naomi board set. It's got a couple differences, but if you had a Naomi or something like that, you could easily transport it over to the Dreamcast without really trying. So the Dreamcast got a lot of good ports. And the controls were built for those ports. And then Sega was like, okay, we got to release games for the Dreamcast. And so they made games for the Dreamcast. But you could feel kind of the difference between the arcade port and how well it was made to, you know, Sega various people trying out these 3D games. Also, you'll notice something else is the controllers were black and kind of edgy up till the Dreamcast. And when they got to the Dreamcast, they were like, okay, no, this is a fun game, and it's a happy game, and we make family-friendly stuff now. Oh man, we're totally not the people who made Mortal Kombat. Yeah! And they aren't the ones who made Mortal Kombat. They're just the ones who had the blood code on it. And oh man, the Sega CD. Wow. That was the Sega CD Mortal Kombat game opening video actually had kids yelling "Mortal Kombat" and pretending like they were about to fight. And you're kind of sitting there going, "Yeah, I could see a congressional hearing happening with this. I can I can totally see this." And everybody's like, "No, no, what on earth are you talking about?" I'm like, "No, just watch this video, man." Anyway, we can see this timeline of Sega kind of copying off others and coming up with their own ideas and maneuvering things and trying to be kind of the antithesis of the Nintendo system. But once PlayStation came in, they were like, no, no, we're going to be family friendly now. And you see this really cool timeline within the understanding of Sega and how they implemented things based on their controls and how the controller worked. Major emphasis in arcade, you can see that. How the other consoles kind of showed what needs to be done. So Sega tried to shoehorn it in a bit, and they created some pretty cool stuff. And you can just see these ideas and these interesting ways of doing things right there. And so it's this great little timeline. So enjoy it. Feel free to get a screen capture of this. Okay, well, next week I'm going to start on the hidden tribe of arcade owners, or of arcade stuff, and we're going to go into more of the native arcade person. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to start doing stuff on conventions. And the entire reason why I'm doing that is I'll be at the Emerald City Comic Con, and that it will just be way easier for me to just run around, take quick pictures, and then do a slideshow while I was at the show. So there we go. Catch y'all later. Bye now.